All the people on the 7th and 8th floor.
All these really photogenic.
Right, they all look good.
Yeah, it's good photos. Yeah.
In the right place, maybe.
Yes, you
You're
are.
in the right place.
Oh, there you are.
That's right.
Wow, okay. How you doing, Eric?
Hey.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Nancy
Eric.
Regal.
How's
I
it
work
going?
for Alto.
Nice to meet you. Good evening. You, I remember.
Yeah. John.
How are you?
Very, very good. Good to see you. You know what I mean?
Good.
Happy to. It's good to get.
Well, they're all look.
Yeah.
The guy on the homepage.
Hey, John. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good.
Station question.
Sure.
So the long range financial forecast,
Yep.
I see the email probably while you talk.
Okay.
And we won't get the calculus valuation until
I've been there since
December.
2012.
Okay.
So can you project out
I guess
the
that's
reasonable
right.
rate for if the national return is 2.4, which we think it will be? I'll send you the email.
So,
I need for 10 years.
Well, I'm trying to remember what we projected
Rana? Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
That
Yeah, yeah.
3.4.
She left, yeah, in 2013.
Yeah, you
We went back on,
Yeah,
we do
that's
have
about
the
right.
8.4, we go through 25, 26.
Really? Have you declared that you are?
I'd love to do more work.
Retiring?
Well, I'll give you another homework. The other one is returning help. No staff is collecting data, contraband.
Yeah.
So, given the last evaluation you did, can you give me a
exciting.
reasonable projection for the
Yeah,
updated data? We'll be referencing, we'll be saying, you know, based on the evaluation update of Patel, it will be upcoming evaluation to complete,
Okay, 'cause this
start
is-
the council later on as part of the budget process. But
That's
basically, that's the best guess we have at the time.
I haven't like
We could be
met
taking
you, but
into account
I mean, I
more
work
current.
No
You know how
problem.
things work around here.
Yeah.
Right, like,
Yeah, there's a lot
like I
of
bet there's
people.
people that are like, oh, you should start it.
Yeah.
Well, I think very, very similar to here.
Yeah.
I think
No worries at all. Yeah, don't worry about it.
14 was very good.
Yeah, there should be, they said they were in tonight too.
How are you doing?
Good.
Very good.
I want to say it's a little better than the
Yeah.
before.
So people have questions, I'll be here.
Yeah, that's right. They're a little less, they have.
Oh,
Yeah, well, yeah, so what they
My
do-
furnace in my house is on, so I'm coming to fix it tomorrow. But it's cold in there.
I think
That's really, that's serious.
So we'll do.
I mean, it's not that serious.
But pretty serious.
Well, it's chilly.
So send her.
I have to put on a sweater
Oh, and a jacket.
and a jacket.
Hey, how are you?
So, we're the only ones here, so I guess we can do whatever we want.
System, and then for the last few data sets we need to project out the salary.
And what we'll all do is send you, I'll have somebody back in the office send you an email and let you know this time you know.
Okay, perfect.
I really good to see.
You were the last time that you do last swimming? Did you do the master's class?
So I don't know whether you guys know my love part.
And then, what
In
time was
particular,
that?
because you guys, my favorite.
5:45, 7, and
5:45 a.m.?
Push back
and 7. And
Wow.
so I usually have 5:45.
Do they have one on Saturday?
Well, I
Yeah.
saw.
At 5:45?
6, 7, and 8.
6, 7, and 8? I am gonna go.
For up to 4 hours.
Is it pretty
So I'm just,
reasonable? Or or?
I think so. I mean, you gotta subscribe.
Four hours.
I don't, you know, I don't know, because I subscribe to a bunch of stuff there, and I don't know how much is Swift versus other stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be.
Do they do it daily? They probably do it daily. You're supposed to, they want you to sign up for a quarter, or a month, or a year, or something.
Yeah, that'd be fine,
But
yeah.
it's all Pacific Masters.
Nice, yeah.
Do you do that here?
I used to have class in Santa Cruz, Toronto. They had the swim center. Yeah, so I used to do it one day a week, and it was great, because then I like to change up my workout. So I like to do swimming like one day a week.
Yeah, but I don't.
Yeah.
A bunch of people, the coaches are fun, the coaches are good, people are nice, right?
Yeah.
You get the Meg Whitman swims out there, you know, you get to see her sometimes, right?
Nice, I'll just start off with swimming, but I think I'll be fine.
Yeah, they got lots of lakes, of course, for like, you know, the people who are more of the, you know, swam in college and are still sort of semi-pro.
Okay.
Sort it out.
Normal people out
Well,
there.
CPR is required all there.
Yeah, I used to swim in college, but I haven't been swimming in a
So
long
that kind of
time.
set us up for.
Oh,
where
right.
was your?
Well, that's a new event.
Oh, my event?
Well, it's very difficult, right? If you can't- if you don't
400-yard Reggie relay.
Yeah, that's not
Yeah,
bad.
and then,
That's like the decathlon.
yeah, yeah, it's fun. I don't
From
know, I
1 year
did
elevation
a couple of
climb,
events.
you go
Yeah,
change the cycle around.
that was my favorite.
So we're trying to think, because what the new accounting.
I was just thinking about.
So we're thinking, maybe we can.
I just got into it.
We can halfway through
Season
season
2.
two.
Yeah, that's right.
Really? So
Because I just finished house.
Where do you go?
the ice club.
They just
Oh,
killed
Ice
that.
Bear Club?
Yeah, when he built the
That's true.
neighborhood,
Okay, yeah, so I'm a little.
he said,
I'm
oh,
like,
Yeah,
three of us
with
together.
leaves.
well, it's
No, we're in
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's
So you go
it's
Southern
got a lot of
California
seasons.
Yeah, part of down there. I was down there earlier.
Yeah, so green.
yeah,
So it was this year.
Yeah, no, let's see. All right, actually a little cost. All right. Relatively close to the plate.
No, they're expensive. Oh, they're expensive.
Yeah.
Well, I should fly.
Palo, if you're all set.
We are. Southern California.
Yeah.
So I book them out.
Okay, I'd like to call the Finance Committee meeting to order. Clerk, if you want to call the
So
roll.
they like the, they like.
Councilmember Philseth,
Here.
Councilmember Niss, Councilmember Scharf,
Here.
Vice Mayor and Chair Schmidt,
Here.
3 present.
Thank you. Liz Niss has been called away on family issues, so she will not be joining us this evening. Let's see, I have no cards for oral communications, so let's start with item number 1, the Library Bond Oversight Committee.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Schmidt, Lalo Perez, Chief Financial Officer. Just to remind the committee, a couple of years ago, the Finance Committee then gave us direction that you wanted to see this more as an information item rather than a discussion unless there was a significant issue. Then you would want to have a discussion. So what we want to let you know is that this is the committee, Oversight Committee hopes that this is the second to the last report. We're right now tentatively scheduled for December 1st to come in and accomplish a couple things. One, to present you the final recommendations that they be decommissioned by the end of December. And second, that they explain to you what recommendations they have on any remaining bond money and how it should be utilized. At this point, there's a projected amount of about 4.3 million that is expected to be in excess, and they're in a planning mode and discussion mode to come up with a recommendation to make to you as a committee, which then you would forward to the council. So at this point, it's mainly accepting the report that you have before you, pending that final 2 steps that I just mentioned.
Okay, so the R12-1 calendar has that item on it.
Correct.
And so this is, in a way, background material for that,
Right, you will receive a final numbers and
with
with the
recommendations.
final amount and recommendations to you.
Okay, do either committee members have questions or comments?
And one of our LBOC members is here as well, at least one. Yes, Jim.
Thank you very much for coming. Eric, do you have any questions or comments?
What are the restricting, so I gather there's going to be $4.3 million left over. What are the constraints on how that can be used?
There's potentially a couple of outstanding small projects that could be considered that would fit within the scope of the bond issuance and the covenants, if you will. There was a discussion about potentially reimbursing the infrastructure reserve from the general fund, which fronted about $1.8 million at the beginning of the project.
Okay.
Otherwise, the rest could be technically what you call defeased. It means that you pay down the bonds for the outstanding amount, therefore reducing the balance for everybody.
So those options will be looked at.
Correct, and the group is going to then make recommendations to you.
So just briefly, there's also some projects that they could do.
If they fit within the
But are they talking
parameters.
about that, or?
I believe there's a discussion about a couple of small ones, is my understanding. Nothing major.
But they have to be capital expenditures.
Correct, they have to fit the parameters of the bond.
Can't be pizza for the finance committee or something.
No,
Yeah.
unfortunately. That comes out of a different pocket.
I haven't seen any pizza yet.
Good. If there are no further comments, then we will accept the report and look forward to December 1st.
Thank you.
That brings us to our main item, pension liability, discussion of options for the future.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. As you may recall, we left off the item with Mr. Bartel giving you a presentation. Unfortunately, had another commitment that evening and had to leave, so there was not a lot of chance for a full round of questions. What we were hoping to do tonight was to have Mr. Bartel give us a quick recap of what he covered with you, emphasize some of the options that he recommends that you consider, and then open it up for the committee to continue asking questions that you may have reserved, or questions of staff as well. And unless you have a, go ahead, Chair.
Just on the process, the goal of this is to identify options for the council, is that right?
That's our understanding, that there was a request by the council to do something similar to what we did with the OPEB or the retired medical, which was that the finance committee reviewed options, looked at the pros and cons, and then forward that to the council for further discussion and then action.
Okay, so we should keep that in mind as we go through our discussions. Great, and if you want to, John, welcome and thanks
Great.
for coming.
Thank you very much. So in the interest of full disclosure here, number one, I do not have a time commitment. That's number one. I don't have anything else to do this evening.
Have you seen our city council?
Early next morning.
I did see that this was agendized for 4 hours, so I know that there is a 4-hour limit, if I understand right. And the fact of the matter is I could probably talk on this topic till you all dropped, if you will. So having said that,
That's a challenge.
Yeah. That's not my intention.
Well,
What I will do is, unless you slow me down, I'm going to really go through some of this very, very quickly. Having said that, though, if you do want me to go slower, please interrupt me. And my preference, if it's okay with you, is if you have questions as I go through this, please interrupt. Don't hold them till till the end. My recollection is there's nobody bashful here, so so the way so the agenda item is discussion outline, 2 slides per page. With a little bit of luck, you will have that. There we go. As I said, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. I will take.
Yeah, I believe we have seen it once quickly.
Yes, yes. So what I will do is kind of hit the highlights and what I think this information shows. So if we start out on really slide 1, so slide 1 talks about CalPERS, what I refer to as kind of upcoming issues. All 3 of these, what I'll refer to as a contribution policy change, that policy change by and large will require agencies to pay more than the minimum payment on the credit card, if you will. So that's number 1. Number 2, assumption changes, taking into account the fact that people continue to live longer. And then thing number 3 is what CalPERS is referring to as a risk mitigation strategy. That's sort of actuarial speak, if you will, for cutting back on the investments in the trust that are equity related, a little bit more conservative investment mix. Their target is to drop from 7.5 to 6.5. The expectation is the methodology they're using, it might take them 20 years to get there, but that's arguably the goal. And if you take a look at slide 2, slide 2 is in a look at CalPERS historical investment return over the last several years. And one of the things you really notice here is the investment return is significantly volatile around that assumed rate of return of 7.5. So my comment to clients is I think the single biggest issue that they have to address is the volatility of those contribution rates and trying to figure out how to do that as part of the budget process. You will also hear me say that volatility will result in unfunded liability that varies a lot from one year to the next, because the unfunded liability is going to be determined on a market value basis. The other issue the city has, and you really can see that in one form or another in several slides, I'm just going to point out very, very quickly, is what I refer to as kind of the maturity of the city. It's the maturity of CalPERS in particular, but the maturity of the city of Palo Alto. And if you take a look, slides 3 and 4, look at the non-safety plan, you can kind of see on slide 4 that red bar is the number of active employees, the blue bars are the number of retirees, and what you really see is a fair number of retirees compared to actives. That's not always a great comparison because those retirees are not all career employees. But if you kind of take a look at slides 5 and 6, we're looking at the safety plan. Much more common for the people who retire on safety to be long-term city employees. And the thing that's quite fascinating about this is that if you look at the right-hand side there, you see over 400 retirees at June 30, 13, 184 actives. So you have, by and large, more than 2 retirees for every active employees. And the fact of the matter is the number of retirees in safety are much more representative of career employees. Much more common for you to hire a safety individual at a young age and have them retire directly from the city.
They retire younger than other
and they retire younger, that's right. They retire younger with more valuable benefits. Right. And the other thing that, of course, is interesting about that is safety is all general fund. So it makes that's the one that creates the issues, if you will. And so slides 7 and 8, 7 looks at the unfunded liability for the miscellaneous plan. 8 is the historical information. What you really see is the big drop in the assets, in particular at 2008, 2009, is what is driving the majority of the city's unfunded liability. So relatively big unfunded liability. The other thing that you can tell from slide 8 is that unfunded liability with CalPERS historical contribution policy is not really closing the gap, if you will. So that is absolutely why they made their contribution policy change. You can see the same information really on slides 9 and 10 for the safety plan. I'll also point out on slides 11 and 12, slides 11 and 12 look at the portion of the liability, which is really a better descriptor of how mature the plan is. The portion of the liability belonging to actives versus retirees. So if you look at slide 11, active employees sitting about 55% of the miscellaneous liability and dropping to about 35% in 2013, and the retiree liability growing from about 35 to about 60, and that the safety is actually quite significant. In particular, you've got at June 30, 2013, more than 70% of your liability for people who are receiving pension benefits. And that,
What's the heading of that graph?
oh, we call it plan maturity, but it's the percentage of the total AAL, which is the actuarial accrued liability, for actives, vested terms, and retirees. So we think of the actuarial accrued liability as that, from an actuary's perspective, is sort of a target asset value. That's how much we would like to have you have set aside. And so this really just describes how much of that belongs to each category of participant.
And what's the terms?
What is the, oh, you mean the, term are vested terminations. So these are people who are not working for the city anymore, but have not yet retired. They may be working at other agencies, or they may be working in the
And
private
you
sector.
carry that liability.
You carry that liability. The city has that liability. That's right.
Because
Okay.
they vested and are eligible.
That's right. They're eligible to get a benefit. They just haven't started it yet.
So in safety, there's almost none of those.
Almost none of those. That's right. And that's because for safety, when you hire somebody, they stay with the city. Not true for non-safety at all. Much more movement from one agency to the next for non-safety.
Especially for firefighters for us.
That's right. Slides 13 and 14 really just show some comparison information. City numbers are in green. What this shows is it's very difficult to compare numbers from one agency to the next when you look at dollar amounts. However, what we do is look at numbers, comparison of the unfunded liability to pensionable wages. And we do that for non-safety and safety. And what you see is the city, to a very large degree, because of how long you've been around, is at a little bit above the average of your comparison, but not by any stretch of the imagination significantly above. And that's really true whether we're talking about miscellaneous or safety. Safety has a tendency to be maybe a little bit higher than miscellaneous. Slide 15 and 16 look at the history of the city's contribution, and the most notable thing here is the right-hand side of this graph is the ramp up in the contribution. That ramp up is really a byproduct of very poor investment return in 2008, 2009, in conjunction with a very slow ramp up to pay off those investment losses. So if you look at that, we're expecting the contribution rates to continue to rise, but probably not at the incremental rate that they've gone up since 9, 10, or 10, 11. Slide 17 and 18 is really the basis of our contribution projections for the city. 19 and 20 projects the cities where we think the city's contribution rates are going to go over the next decade. The only thing that is not in these projections is CalPERS risk mitigation strategy, partly because they still have not adopted that policy. We think they're going to adopt it here in the next couple of weeks, but we have not. We kind of want to wait and see how the policy is final before we build it into the projection. So what you really see on each of slides 19 and 20 is the solid green line assumes CalPERS gets the 7.5% rate of return, and then you see the impact of poor versus good investment return. So you see on 19 is the short-term projection for miscellaneous, and on 20 it's a long-term projection. And the one comment I always make when you look at that long-term projection is I actually think that's the good news. And the good news is if CalPERS gets that 7.5% return on a regular basis, then your contribution rates will decline over the next 30 years. And you can see that same slope or shape to the graph if you look at safety as well on slide 22.
So what do you expect that to be, those returns?
Well, if they get 7.5%, so our expectation is if they don't change the investment mix, we think in the long run, the analysis we've done is that it will be very, very close to that 7.5 over the long run. We base that on analysis from investment advisors based on asset class. However, these graphs don't really adequately talk about the volatility from one year to the next. That makes they give the appearance that the contribution rates are going to be slowly rising and then slowly coming down. We think it's going to be much, much more volatile than that. So in some ways, those graphs are a little deceiving, if you will. Slide 23, 24, 25, and 26 all talk about PEPRA. A fair number of folks have in their head that PEPRA addressed the unfunded liability. Just to be clear, it did not. It only changed benefits for people that are non-public sector employees hired on or after January 1, 13. Those are referred to as PEPRA employees. So there is a mandate to provide a lower benefit for those folks. There is a mandate to have those folks pay half of the cost of the benefit on a go-forward basis. That had nothing to do with the unfunded liability. No impact on the unfunded liability. All it will do is over a very long period of time, it will result in a lower liability, which should result in less volatility. But that is, we're probably talking 30 plus years out. So not much of a panacea by any stretch of the imagination. And so we're showing on 24 and 26 what we think the difference in the city's contribution rate would be with and without PEPRA, using as an illustration that 7.5% investment return and we think it's quite modest at best.
So the graph that I want to go back to is 22.
Yep.
So that graph is what we expect the contributions to be, right? And so they actually get, I noticed the good investment returns and expected investment returns
They
end up
match.
in the same place.
Yeah, that's right. And here's why. PEPRA has one of the components of PEPRA is that your contribution can't drop below the normal cost. So if the way I think of this is a little simplistic, but if you end up with assets greater than your liability, you get no benefit from that on your contribution. You have money in the trust, but people think of risk as being all downside risk, poor investment return. I actually think of one of the risks is now having too much money in the plan. Think of it this way: if you had a portion of the city's reserves that you could not use to fix sidewalks, to do anything with, that would probably be more than a little frustrating to council. That is what will happen if you end up with too much money in CalPERS, assuming the law does not change.
So if I understand what you just said,
Yeah.
is that should we choose to pay down some of the liability in advance and give the money to CalPERS, and we give them too much,
Yeah.
then we can't get it back.
That's right. That's exactly right. And I know that this is not a very good example, but we'll kind of go to the options. And in the interest of full disclosure, this actually pains me to say this, because as an actuary, I'm trained to want you to move to become 100% funded. And to get to that point where you have assets equal to liability. The problem is, once you get there, because of the volatility of the investment return, there is a reasonable chance that you will have money in the trust that you do not have access to. And so I don't know any other technical way to describe this than that sucks.
Got it.
So when we get, in fact, it probably makes a certain amount of sense to talk about the options now. If we go to slide 27, because these are the questions that all of our clients are asking now. What are the options to take care of the unfunded liability? So what we're doing is listing them here, just so you know. Just because we have them listed here does not mean we are big fans of them. Okay. So very first one, pension obligation bonds. That's where you go out to the market, you borrow money at whatever the borrowing rate is. These are taxable. So taxable means that you're probably paying somewhere in the neighborhood of 4.5–5%, depending upon credit rating. So you borrow at 4 or 5, you give to CalPERS, and I used to say it was a pure interest arbitrage. You were borrowing at 4.5, you're giving it to CalPERS. If CalPERS earns more than 4.5, you win that arbitrage. The problem is it's not so simple now, because if you pay off your unfunded liability and CalPERS investment return is better than you expected, better than 7.5, you actually lose that arbitrage. And the reason you lose it is because you still have debt service on your pension obligation bond, but your contribution rate is not positively impacted. So we recently did a study for another city. This is crazy to me. I'll just tell you this in advance. When my folks first gave me these numbers, I didn't believe them. I thought they were absolutely wrong. We found that there was a 65% chance that the city would spend more money, more cash, if they paid off if they borrowed at, I think we used a 5% bond rate, and if they paid if what they did was borrowed, paid the full unfunded liability off, the city had a 65% chance that their cash flow would be adverse if they did that. Whereas without the change in PEPRA, that was probably in the neighborhood of, would have been 5–10%. And so what we are telling people is, we're not investment advisors, but if you did decide to go down the pension obligation bond route, be very, very careful.
But you should be able to optimize for it, right? I mean, why pay off 100% then? What is if you paid off 50% and took the arbitrage on 50%?
Yeah.
I mean, there must be a number that works where
Yeah, so
something makes sense.
here's the crazy part about that is when we get to, let's look at the third square bullet here, which is pay the unfunded liability off sooner rather than later. What's going on here is you're getting to the point where you are 100% funded. So on a pension obligation bond, if you pay it off 100%, you get there immediately. If you shorten the amortization, you get there sooner. What happens is you still are, the message, as this is the part that is painful for me, and the sooner you get to 100% funded with money in CalPERS, the sooner you get to the point where there is a legitimate chance that your investment return is going to get you to excess assets that you will not have access to. And so...
No, that makes perfect sense, right? Because let's say the actuarial value of the unfunded liability is $400 million.
Yep.
Okay, so we borrow $400 million at 5%, we pay it all off. Suddenly, CalPERS makes some great investments, and it turned out the actual value of it was only $300 million. So we're out $100 million.
That's right.
So
that's exactly
that's essentially
right.
what you're saying.
That's a very simplistic explanation, and that's right.
That's about all I can handle, right?
It just means the next year you don't make any payment.
But
they
that's
draw down your...
Yeah, you don't, well, no, but here's the thing. You have to keep making your normal cost payment.
But it's not as big a trap as it looks, right? Because this is the kind of decision we make all the time. We run our own utilities. We do long-term contracts with energy providers, right? Sometimes we get it wrong. Okay?
Yeah.
Sometimes we lock in a price here and the price goes down.
Yeah.
If we do that, as long as we know what we're doing, we did our best.
Well, what you will hear me say, you will not hear me say don't do a pension obligation bond. You will not hear me say don't do any of things. What you will hear me say is you run the risk of creating an environment where you will spend more money. Yeah. And so I'm a likelihood kind of a guy. Right. And so when you look at when you look at these four options, whether you're pulling money, whether you're paying, anytime you're paying the unfunded liability off sooner, you increase the likelihood that you will put yourself in a position where you have money sitting there that you don't have access to. Mm-hmm. Now, having said that, the slide 28 has two options that we think don't get you to that place. Right. And those two options are you set up an internal service fund and you use that to deal with contribution volatility or unfunded liability. The downside of an internal service fund is very low investment return, maybe 75 basis points. My guess is that this city is probably a little better than some of our other clients at that, and you may be pushing 100 basis points on your money.
That was actually one of our principal questions.
Yeah.
Some of our principal questions that we wanted to ask you tonight, which is if we did something like that, is there some precedent or some way that we can invest it in something that gives market rate returns as opposed to T-bills or something like that?
So I would defer to staff or legal counsel. I have been told by all of our other clients the answer really is no.
So what's the PARS and PFM investments?
Well, no, but that's different. So that second square bullet on slide 28, what you are doing is you are saying you are creating a supplemental trust that is not part of city assets. It is what's referred to as an irrevocable trust. I'll talk about what irrevocable means in a minute, but what you are doing is essentially setting up a separate asset outside of CalPERS investments, but similar to CalPERS investments. Similar meaning it's irrevocable, can only be used for two things: pay the city back for contributions that it makes to CalPERS, or send money directly to CalPERS. So it can't really be used for any other purpose. And doing that means that you have the ability to invest that money more aggressively and you could invest it as aggressively, for example, as CalPERS does. Now, I'm not an investment guy. Don't listen to me on this, but you're hearing me say one of the issues with CalPERS assets, and in fact, by the way, you're hearing CalPERS say this, one of the issues with their assets is that they are volatile because they are significantly invested in equities. So if you set money up here, you can invest it a little more conservatively and use it to mitigate that volatility. Now we think, again, we would defer to the legal minds on this. We think that the minimum contribution of the normal cost only applies to what CalPERS tells you the contribution rate is. So if you have money over here and your CalPERS fund is not 100% funded, it's 80% funded, but you have another set of money over here, we think you can use that to defray the city's costs and to actually have a budget that would be less than the normal cost. So we think that would get you to a much better position.
Think 3 times.
Yeah.
You know.
Only because we have not heard a legal opinion on this
So
yet.
is the difference?
That's why.
Is
It's the only reason.
Is the difference between this and some other vehicles?
Yeah.
That we would determine every year what the contribution in the irrevocable trust was, and therefore if CalPERS did really well last year, then we might give it a little more, a little less this
yeah.
year.
So
And
what-
so we
what-
don't get into this situation that if CalPERS makes 10%, then we've wasted a lot of money.
Yeah, what I would suggest you do is something like the following. If you go to slide 29. So I really think there are two uses of the supplemental trust.
Okay.
Use number one is you just use it as a way to pay down your unfunded liability.
Yep.
And if you do that, it has a positive impact on your GASB 68 net pension liability. Every accountant we've talked with agrees with that statement. I think, though, the best use is as a rate stabilization fund. So, for example, let's go back for a moment to slide 21. Let's say we're talking about safety. And so what you're hearing us say is your safety rate is going to go from about 42% in 15-16 to about 53.5%, 54% in 19-20-21. So if you just said, what we want is we want rates to be stable. And so you just pick, I'm just going to pick one, 48%. You just say, from a budget standpoint, from now and through the next 7, 8, 9, 10 years, we'd like our contribution rate to be 48% of pay. So what you do is you say, let's take some seed money, move it into the supplemental trust, set the budget at 48%, and then let's do an analysis to see, will that work? Do we need to set up that seed money? Do you need to put in $2 million to make sure that money works? or do you need to put in $10 million to make sure that works? And what we would suggest is you do that, do a simple analysis, come back with a likelihood that you're going to be successful over that period of time, and then keep looking at how your trust is doing. So if CalPERS has 2 good years in a row, maybe you either adjust down your 48%, and when I say set your budget at 48, here's what I mean. If your rate comes in below 48, your budget is 48, and you take the difference between 48 and whatever the rate comes in at, and you move that into the trust. If the CalPERS rate comes in above 48, you budget 48 and you take the difference between whatever it comes in at and the 48 and you pull it out of the trust to supplement your, so that way you are always paying CalPERS exactly what they're asking for, but yet you have that budget stability. And so what we think is that depending upon how you set your rate, maybe 48, 50%, you may want to think about how, for example, you may say, oh, 50, we want to set it at 50, or we want to set it at 48, but jumping from 42 to 48 immediately may be too painful for the budget. So you kind of ramp up to that 48 over a short period of time, or you do something relative to that. You may also want to have, as a council, a policy that says, we get to the end of the year and we've got a budget surplus. We're going to take a portion of that budget surplus, move it into the supplemental trust. We'll use a portion, replenish reserves, or do one-time projects. But the idea really is to use that supplemental trust. Sounds like I'm really being an advocate for these trusts. I think I am, because partly because the more analysis we have done this trust on trusts like this, the more I am convinced they can get to that budget stability. It is extremely valuable for agencies where that contribution volatility becomes very problematic from a budget standpoint. And so that's, in my mind, the reason to do this. It works better for agencies that are a little more financially stable. If you really don't have money, if you don't have seed money, right, this supplemental trust does not work at all.
Sure.
So you have to have cash to be able to move there. You have to have some plan for getting that cash. Can't help you with that by any stretch of the imagination.
The city cannot be in hock and payday lenders.
Yeah.
We have to have the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just want to go back and
Yeah.
understand some of the basics that I guess I don't really have in my mind properly. So every year CalPERS, well, I just want to go broadly.
Yes.
So every year CalPERS sets a contribution rate.
Yes.
And that's based on their returns that they've gotten previously, and they smooth those returns over a number of years, I thought.
They actually are not smoothing them
So they're
anymore.
not.
So this is a little simplistic. They're determining your unfunded liability on a market value basis, and then what they're doing is stepping into that market value rate over 5 years. It's kind of like smoothing them for 5 years.
Okay, so they take your unfunded, so every agency then has a different contribution rate that's asked
right.
by CalPERS, right?
That's right.
So the part that I was lost a little bit is, these are our projected ones here, right, for safety.
That's right.
And then when you said that if we had no unfunded liability, and CalPERS does really well, because our contribution then goes to zero, right?
The answer is no.
No.
Cannot.
So why not? That's the part I'm missing.
There was a change in the law as part of PEPRA, effective January 1/13. CalPERS cannot tell you your rate drops below the normal cost.
So what is the normal cost?
Yeah,
What does
let's
that
talk
mean?
about
What is the
definition.
normal
of,
cost?
Yeah, let's talk about definition of terms. This is a little simplistic, but bear with me. Think of the value of benefits due to service that's already been earned as a stack of coins. You hire somebody in the very first year, and that's one coin. in the end of 2 years, now you have 2 coins for every individual. And the coins are the value of benefits that is due to service that's already been rendered. Each coin that you add is the normal cost. Now, technically, it's not a stack of coins because the normal cost is different based upon how old you are. There's lots of complicating factors here. But if you just literally think of this as a stack of coins, with each coin being the normal cost. The normal cost represents, in actuarial speak, it represents the value of benefits being earned by people who are rendering service to the city.
Okay, you're sort of going to something that I wanted to ask after we got all this
Yeah.
discussion in sort of a different direction.
Yeah.
But are what you're saying is the normal cost is the annual accrued liability for each
Yeah,
person?
I would.
Annual
it's
change
the
in accrued
annual liability that accrues.
Right.
So it's only
I
for
just,
working
I'm, cha-
employees.
I'm taking your words and
Right.
changing them
I
around.
want to understand, right?
Yeah, it's the portion of the benefit expressed as a present value, expressed as a percentage of pay, expressed however you want to express it for services that are being rendered this year. So
Did you say it's a percent of pay? So
Yeah.
is a normal cost, is it a dollar amount or is it a percentage?
Well, I know this is going to be confusing as heck, but actuaries don't care because it's the same. So a percentage of pay gets you to a dollar amount, or the dollar amount gets you to a percentage of pay. From an actuary's perspective, we like the normal cost to be a level percentage of pay over time, and the CalPERS calculation is designed to give you a normal cost that's a level percentage of pay, an increasing dollar amount.
So, the city hires my son
Yeah.
to be
Okay.
a librarian.
Okay.
And he gets his wage and his medical and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And then the assumption is that if he works here XDX years, he'll get a pension, right? So the city accrues a liability on that pension,
That's right.
okay? Is the normal cost, I assume the normal cost is related to that accrual.
That's right. In fact, it's the value of that accrual. Think of
Okay.
it that way.
So is it the value, what assumption on how many years he works for the city goes into that cost? Does it assume he works for 30 years?
Yeah.
Or does it just count the first year, right? Assume he works
Yeah.
for 1 year.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the next year, then if he works for another year, there's another normal cost
Yeah.
and so forth. How does that work?
So let me ask because I promise you I can answer that question. And I promise you I'm going to answer it. But
I've been
I need
thrashing
some
poor Walter
direction.
with spreadsheets on this stuff. so
No,
okay.
but I need some direction. And the direction is how complex of an answer do you want? Because what I want you to do is go back to my coin example.
Right.
That is so basic, it isn't even funny. And it's, from an actuarial perspective, absolutely wrong. But if you have that picture in your head, you can kind of see it. So, but it is technically wrong. Why is it technically wrong? Because if you hire somebody, if your son is 23 years old, okay, the size of the coin is not the same as if your son is 50 years old.
Sure.
And so,
Okay.
but the answer to how much you set aside and how the calculation is made is quite different than if the city is hiring your son at age 25 versus age 50. And it's also quite different if the city hires your son at age 50 and your son worked at another agency for 20 years. So all what the actuary is doing
Right.
is taking into account the particulars
Right.
of how old your son is,
Right.
what the compensation is, what the likelihood is that he will continue to work at the city,
Yep.
what the likelihood is that he will retire, and by the way, it would be son or daughter, so he or she
Yep.
would retire at age 50, 51, 52, 60, 65,
Yep.
and it takes into account the level of benefit, the probability of termination, the likelihood of
All that good stuff.
retirement, all of that is taken into account.
So then, so the definition of normal cost,
Yeah,
is it the net present value of all that,
no,
or is it
1 year.
1 year's worth? Okay.
Yeah, so let me say this again.
Okay.
Because it is really important that you get your head around this statement. It is the value of services rendered this year.
Yes.
It's, so
Right.
your son does not get a 30-year benefit just because he works 1 year.
Right.
He gets the opportunity to
Correct.
get it, but he also gets the opportunity to earn wages.
Yep.
But he's only earning wages in this year for this year's service.
So.
And
is
similarly,
then
the normal
is-
cost is this year.
So then, after the first year,
Yeah,
suppose he quits
yes,
on day 1 of year 2 and goes
Yeah.
to work someplace else.
okay,
Is the normal cost, he has accrued a certain amount of.
That's
A
right.
coin.
Right, he's-
One coin.
He's
He's
accrued
one
he's
coin.
accrued 1 coin.
that's right.
And so the normal cost is the net present value of that coin.
That's right,
Okay, so if he works another year,
yes,
okay, and then quits,
yes,
then he has accrued 2 coins.
yes,
And the normal cost is now the sum of both coins?
no.
It's the net present value.
No,
It's
no,
net-
no, go slow.
Right.
Let's, so
Or it's the
normal
value
cost
of the
is
second
1
coin.
coin each year.
1 coin each year, okay.
The actuarial liability is the sum of all the prior coins.
Got it.
So the liability for the city
Yep.
has to do with how many coins he has.
Yep.
If he's only worked 1 year and then he goes someplace else,
Got it.
he has 1 coin
Got it.
and no more future normal cost because he's working someplace
So
else.
when we hire somebody, the net present value, of the net present value of the unfunded pension liability for that person, okay, is going to be the sum of all the coins less the value of what they pay into their pension fund.
No.
Okay.
So here's the problem. What you're doing is you're using
Oh,
term,
like stick to the
yeah.
normal
you're-
cost,
What
right?
you're, yeah,
I
what
really
you're
just wanted to
doing
say normal
is you're using terminology. So let me take your words and say it differently.
Okay.
But I'm being very careful about the words that I'm using. It is true, when you hire somebody on day 1, there is a present value of their expected benefit payment.
Yes.
Okay, that is not a liability.
Okay.
And the reason I'm saying it's not a liability is because it doesn't become a liability until they earn the benefit.
Correct.
Okay.
Understood.
So,
Okay.
so
It is a potential liability.
it is,
but it's
no
not a
question
liability.
about that.
Okay,
No
got it.
question about
Got it.
that. That's right.
Got it.
And so as an actuary, I will go out of the way to say what you should have set aside is not that potential liability, but the actual liability based on how much service they've rendered.
Right.
And I would say the same. I would use as an example salary, right? When you hire somebody, you don't have an unfunded liability for their salaries for the next 30 years. You have
That's true.
a potential. You do
don't
have.
recognize next year's wage as a liability.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, you never do, right? And so this is the exact same thing.
Okay.
It's no different.
Let me ask a question to make sure I understand. Someone works 3 years
Yeah,
and accrues 3 coins.
yes,
Leaves, never comes back.
yes.
Does that turn into an asset for all the other workers?
So let me give you, I'm going to apologize in advance for how complicated this is, okay? It depends. Let me give you an example. If the individual at the end of 3 years takes their contributions with them, then they walk away with the city having no obligation left. In that case, what would have happened is money would have gone into the trust with some expectation that they might have gotten a benefit, and now they're not going to get all of that benefit. So in that particular example, the money that is there now goes to pay for unfunded liability for everybody else. Now let me give you scenario number 2. Scenario number 2 is they don't walk away with their money. They leave the money, and instead of walking away with their money, they go work at City of Mountain View. And
No, I'm only interested in people who do not
yeah,
come back into the CalPERS system.
yeah. Then the answer is if you leave with less than 5 years of service and you don't participate in the system, you will walk away with only your contributions with interest, and the extra money will belong. It doesn't really belong to the other members. It really becomes part of the city's assets and mitigates the city unfunded liability.
Does that mean one way we have of running down our liability is to increase the share of workers who leave before they vest?
Yet the challenge is you can't. I'm not an attorney. you can't just because they're not working here doesn't mean they're not going to vest. So in other words, the people who leave, if they go to work at another CalPERS agency,
Yeah.
they can vest. What happens is, this is a little simplistic. This is very different, public versus private sector. A public sector employees, by the way, particularly safety, have a significant knowledge about the value of their benefits. So
Yeah,
most of them,
I understand.
yeah,
I'm just concerned that CalPERS is getting those coins to hold for us,
oh,
and they're holding it for everybody in the state.
no, yeah. I am,
But there is turnover in
Yeah.
the state.
what
And
happens
so
is,
for them, the number is sizable.
yeah, so the inherent in your question is that there is some subsidy the city is making to either CalPERS or to the state or to other agencies. I'm smiling. The reason I'm smiling is because one of the very first projects I ever worked on was related to how some agencies were subsidizing other agencies in CalPERS. And it absolutely was the case. When CalPERS staff really fully understood what was going on, they actually changed the way it worked. I have a unbelievably high confidence level that there really is no subsidy from one agency to the next anymore. Gains associated with people who leave the city and take their contributions with interest, I believe, strongly believe, let me say this, that those gains rest with the city of Palo Alto and they don't go anyplace else.
Okay, one other question on normal cost.
Yeah.
On page 15, you
Yep.
have normal cost and total ER contribution rates.
Yeah.
And in 2001, 2, 3, and 4, it went to 0.
Yeah,
Now, you said that you cannot have.
I did.
Zero
I did say
normal.
that.
Can't go below the normal cost
Here's
is
what,
what you're
here's what I
saying, right?
said. Yeah, I want, in the, if we had.
That's actually a
if-
good thing.
If we had some, yeah, in fact, your observation is right spot on. Effective 1/1/13 and later. The reason this was in the law is because cities, a lot of cities had contributions dropping to zero, and there was, particularly on the labor side, by the way, significant concern that those contributions dropped to zero. They refer to that as contribution holiday, and that's the reason. I'm regurgitating. I'm not telling you I agree with this, by the way. That was the reason why contributions spiked up, was because employers didn't contribute enough, and so they put into PEPRA this elimination of the contribution holiday. I could give you a very long explanation for why that's not right, and why, from an actuary's perspective, it is very problematic that your contribution can't drop below the normal cost. But you can either trust me but that is true for most agencies in the state. They had zero or close to zero contributions, and people who wrote the law believed that was very problematic, and so no more contribution holiday.
This chart seems to say that that was a mistake. Someone made a mistake by doing that. Now you look at the far right of the chart, you're in the opposite point.
Yeah.
Is the normal costs seem to have lost relationship with the actual cost.
With the contribution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what happens is that large unfunded liability, now the difference, by the way, between the normal cost and the employer contribution is the payment on the unfunded liability. So I know I said it's a long, complicated answer, but what I want you to do is think of it this way. You have money in the bank, and that money in the bank is being used to pay a debt that you have. You have multiple ways to pay that debt off. You can take all the money from the bank, pay it off right away, and immediately get relief. You can use the money that you have in the bank over a long period of time and get partial relief for a long period of time. The reason your contribution rates went to zero here was because CalPERS used up the excess assets over a very short period of time to give you a low contribution. 5-year amortization, short, and so I'm being a little simplistic, but that's exactly what happened. So if PEPRA were left up to the actuaries, what we would say is no more short-term use of money in the bank. Let's use it, but let's use it over a longer period of time so you don't get those extreme contribution holidays. And so right now, there is no ability to use it at all. Forget whether it's short or long term.
So I must have this wrong because it seems simple, actually. So it must be wrong, right? But the normal cost, that coin, that is a real liability.
Each year.
Each year.
Yes.
It's a real liability.
It's
So
adding to your liability.
If the
That's
city
what-
doesn't give that to CalPERS, then the city is creating an unfunded liability, and that's why the contribution should go below the normal cost.
Do you mind if I modify your statement a little bit? Because that was so close, it wasn't even funny.
Okay? The city should set aside the money, okay, to pay that, and so CalPERS requires.
That's the logic. What you just described is exactly the logic behind the law. Now, let me change your example a little bit. pretend for a moment you have money sitting over here. If you didn't have that money over there, your description would be right spot on. If you have this money over here and you have a coin being added to create the liability, and you have some ability to use this money over here, then you can use your existing excess assets.
Right.
But if you have no money over there, you're right spot on. But what the law says, even if we have this money over here, we can't use it.
Yeah.
You have to keep adding
Right.
to avoid the perception that the liability is. And what
Right.
you're hearing me say is, it's a little more complicated
Right.
than that. But
CalPERS says, you can't keep it over there. You have to give it to us.
That's right.
To take care of it.
that's what the law says.
Right.
That's right.
Okay,
Okay.
so
Got
just wanted to get back to what I understand.
Yeah.
So, first of all, our normal cost seems pretty stable.
Yes.
Now, do you expect it to continue on being roughly at that, 18 to 20% for safety, and for miscellaneous, roughly 10%?
Yeah. With the exception of two things. One is these normal costs don't fully take into account the fact that people are continuing to live longer. So I would expect each one to go up a little bit because of that. And you'll see that in your next
So if
valuation.
anything, you expect the normal cost to go up over time, just a little bit, because people are living longer. So
Yeah,
1 or
but
2%.
what's going to happen is it's going to pop up. It won't gradually go up.
It'll just go pop up, right?
It'll pop up.
And then it'll be a new graph line about 2% straight.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the miscellaneous number, instead of being 10 because of mortality, maybe that's going to be 11.
Okay.
And I think the 18 for safety, maybe that'll be 20.
Okay, so then I just want to go back to understanding the contribution rate.
Yeah.
Therefore, the difference between the normal rate and our contribution rate is simply the unfunded liability. If we
The
paid off,
payment on the unfunded
be
liability.
paid. So if we completely paid it off, we'd be paying the normal rate.
Yes.
Okay, and so the risk is if we paid it off completely, and yet we had extra, and then CalPERS has a higher return, we're stuck paying the normal rate no matter what CalPERS returns
Yes.
are.
Yep.
That's
Whereas
exactly
if
right.
CalPERS gets great returns,
Yep.
the numbers go, the graph will head down, and so the difference could shrink. between
What'll
the two.
happen is, if you pay that unfunded liability, all of a sudden those dark green squares drop to the normal cost. And then if investment return is poor,
Right.
you will see you will see a gap arise again. But if investment return is good, you will not, it will remain at the normal cost. And you will continue to accumulate money that you can't use.
So if I go over to this graph where you do it out to 25, 26, right?
Yeah.
And here's miscellaneous, I could basically look at this and say, we're at 11 instead of 31, instead of these 34, 35, 36, right? If we have the expected CalPERS returns, right?
Could you just do me a favor and say that again? I want to
Yes.
get my head around your
So
question.
what I'm looking to do is to impose on slide 19,
Yep,
right, the normal cost graph,
yes,
which would be basically
Oh,
10% and then pop up to 11%,
Yeah.
somewhere along there,
Yeah.
right? So,
it's a component of all of these rates. It's in these rates.
right, so if I'm looking at good investment returns, right, for most of the time, even good investment returns, and that assumes good investment returns every year, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You don't really get down until you're 25, 26 when you're at 14.6,
That's right.
right?
That's
And
right.
if you have bad investment returns, you're at 45.4.
That's right.
Okay.
So do me a favor and go to slide 20. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No, fine.
But if you go to slide 20, what you see is that good investment return gets to 8.4 in 26, 27, if my eyes are right there.
Yeah.
26, 27, good returns, yes, get you to 8.4.
That 8.4 is the normal cost rate.
Okay, so that would be the normal cost.
That's right. And so you see that bottom, the normal cost gradually declines, because you're hiring PEPRA people, which decreases your normal cost.
So our normal cost may actually go down then from that 11.
It
It'll
will.
spike up and then it'll start heading down to about that 8.4.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think, does it get down to like 6.7 with really good investment in 45,
No, the
46?
6.7, but the decline in the normal cost has nothing to do with investment return. It has everything to
With the
do
PEPRA.
with the PEPRA. That's
Sure,
right.
if everybody's on more, with more people on tier 3, because if you're in tier 3, your normal cost is lower than if you're
That's
tier
right.
1.
That's right. It's exactly right.
So I'll tell you what I'm thinking, and this is the part that I wanted to get to, is that it seems to me, what you said is that you could have a fund, right?
Yeah.
And you can use that fund to pay the normal cost,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So we could create a fund that returns 7%. You know, using
You
that
could.
separate, that.
You could.
I was thinking, that
Yeah.
was that second thing.
Yes.
You could create that, and you could also go ahead and play the arbitrage. So if we have a $300 million
Pension obligation.
pension obligation, it's clear to me you wouldn't borrow 300 million. That would be silly. But it's unclear to me that you wouldn't borrow, say, 100 million, and then you'd have a $200 million liability,
So,
at which point you would have a lower contribution rate, which would still be above your normal cost, even assuming good returns for most of this. Now, at some point, you're right, if you had good returns every year for the future, which seems really unlikely to
no,
me.
no argument.
Right?
So can I give you my, this is an editorial comment.
Yes.
To the extent that you take notes, please do so with a pencil, not a pen.
Okay.
Because I'm giving you an opinion that, you know, I'm an actuary, I'm not an investment advisor.
Right.
I'm not a city council member. All I am is a, you know, an actuary who understands probabilities. If I personally had the option of borrowing at 4.5 or 5 and giving it to somebody where I thought the expected return was 7.5 and it was my money and I accepted that arbitrage, I promise you I would do that so fast it isn't even funny.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
No, but let me finish.
I know where he's going.
This ain't my money.
Right.
And so if you take a step back for a second, there are laws in the state that prevent you from having taxpayer money invested in high-risk investments. You are your reserve. Somebody could describe this way better than I, but the city investment funds are short-term, extremely high quality, no risk of loss of principal.
Right.
And so I'm going to say this, and I'm confident that my bond advisor friends would not like me to say it like this, but I'll say it like this. So issuing a pension obligation bond is a way for you to borrow money and invest in things that you can't otherwise invest in. So I'm not telling you don't do it. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm just saying your tolerance for risk is different because it's not my money you're investing. You're investing it for the taxpayers. And my 2 cents worth
CalPERS
is
is investing it for the taxpayers.
no question. The difference is CalPERS is doing it, not the city.
Right, we're turning it over to CalPERS,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And so, just to be clear, if you did it for 300 million, I think that gets you to a different level of risk
Right.
than if you're doing it with 5 million in a supplemental trust. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be very careful. And then you also have entities like the oh shoot, Lalo, help me. Is it the AICP? There is an accounting organization. Yeah. I'm so sorry. I can't. AICPA, is it AICPA that has issued a white paper. They used to have a position that said if you're going to issue a pension obligation bond, be really careful about what you're doing. Now their position is, don't do it. I'm just saying, be very, there is no question, if I could do this with my money, I'd do this so fast, it isn't even funny. Nobody's gonna loan me $300
But let's say,
million.
but I wanted to get back to it. So if we issued a pension obligation, could you figure out the right amount so that the odds are that you are, you know, you have a very high probability that you will not be under your normal costs, so you won't be wasting
I
money?
think you
Yeah, you
could.
can calculate
I think you
this.
could.
I think you could,
I think
right?
you could. I agree with that.
And then-
Just so you know, we've not ever made that calculation, but I think that's a calculation that could be made.
And then, you know, you basically are saying, and using an expected return of 7.5%. It'd be interesting to say if you said, well, yourself,
Yeah.
well, let's assume CalPERS does a 6.5% return.
Yeah.
That would mitigate your risk substantially over 7.5%. I mean, it's more likely that CalPERS will achieve 6.5 or better than they will achieve 7.5.
No
or
question
better.
about that.
And so it seems that there is some number here where we could save the city, you know, substantial money over time by doing a small pension obligation, or not as small, and $100 million is not small.
Yeah,
maybe
I
it's
don't,
50 million, maybe
I,
it's
I
75.
don't know whether it's 50 million,
I
100
don't either.
million,
I have
20
no
million.
idea, right? But there seems to me that there's a number where you don't really put much at risk. You know, from an optics, you are giving the money to CalPERS and assuming they're going to do worse than CalPERS says they're going to do. And
That's
then,
what- yeah,
If you
that's
borrow
what
at
long
4%,
beach did that,
CalPERS
yeah.
makes 6.5%. If you borrow at 4.5%, CalPERS makes 6.5%, then you're making 2% on $100.
and frankly, if CalPERS makes 5%, you're not worse off.
Right.
That's right.
You know,
That's
so
no
If
question.
you borrow at 4.5% and CalPERS makes 4%, okay, you're losing money, but not much.
but not much.
But what I
So
want
it
you to do
doesn't
is take a
seem very
step back,
risky.
but I want you to
Loses.
take a step back. There are two risks here. There is the risk that they will earn less than what you're paying.
Right.
Okay. But there is, even though you're not, what I hope you heard me say at the beginning is that the analysis we have done for agencies where they pay the unfunded liability off sooner than CalPERS expects still gets them into a likelihood greater than a 50% chance that they will spend more money than they will save. So I think if we did that analysis, you would still hear us say it will, from a pure arbitrage standpoint, you might come out ahead, but you would come out in a position that would be less favorable than if you did not do it and instead kind of put the money over in a supplemental
So we
trust.
borrow a
Because
pension obligation bond and then put the money into our own account? You can do that?
Oh, I think you could do that. You couldn't put it into an internal service fund. I think now, keep in mind, the attorneys have to weigh in. You're not going to hear me say that would work without the attorneys buying into it, but I think you could.
Well,
I
you're
think
talking
that's
about
right.
two very fundamentally different vehicles, okay? One is a mechanism to set aside money to pay down the unfunded liability and, you know, and not get stuck paying T-bill rates, right, for that. The other is a way to actually make money on the arbitrage.
That's right.
Right. So they're different, right? So
Right.
we could do one or the other, or what you just suggested is sort of both.
I suggest a combination because then you get the benefits of both and you mitigate risks on both ends. That's what I was thinking.
Well, it is absolutely doable to look at that. I'm just telling you what I think the answer is going to be.
So I lost your train of thought.
Okay.
I didn't follow when you said this makes sense on the arbitrage, but at the end, CalPERS, and you said it won't come out less favorable because CalPERS will spend more money, or who will spend more?
But here's what will happen. So if you think of this as I can't really draw, but I think of this as kind of a probability distribution, right?
Correct.
Where if your contribution could drop below the normal cost,
Okay.
then you would hear me say, regardless of how much money you issue, you might have a 90, maybe in somewhere between a 95 and an 85% chance of success purely on the interest arbitrage. But because a portion of that probability distribution gets you to 100% funded sooner, then you have a portion of that probability distribution has money sitting at CalPERS that you don't have access to. And so what that does is that moves your probability of success from 95 to 85 from that range, let's just call it 90% chance of success, moves it to a lower chance of success. And so what I think you're going to find is that it would move it to too low of a chance of success. So let me say this differently. If I am investing my money, I only want a chance of success that's greater than 50%. I might want 55 because I'm a conservative guy.
But it's your money, you'll take 51.
Yeah, but let's pretend 51 would work. If I'm investing my mother's money, thank you very much. That's not mine. I don't want a 51% chance of success. I might want a 70% chance.
You got a big ass risk premium.
Right, that's right. And so if you're investing taxpayer money, you might want something that is a higher percentage. The thing that I have a high degree of confidence on is that 90% chance will drop to too low. We're talking theoretically because we haven't done the calculation, but because of the calculations we've done, I think you would get that probability of failure. Failure meaning you're going to lose money on this deal. Remember, you lose money if you lose the arbitrage, or CalPERS investments do really well and you win the arbitrage big time. Now, the other scenario is
somehow that scenario doesn't seem that bad, though.
So can I
Where
tell
CalPERS
a
does
story?
great.
Suzanne?
So I know of an agency that sold, bought pension obligation bonds and then
Many years
ago, and paid down their liability at CalPERS to get to be one of the zeros on this chart in 2001, 2, and 3. Paid only the pension obligation bonds, did not have to pay CalPERS, and everyone was glorious. The employees paid nothing, and then there was the huge loss. And pension rates came back strong, and they had to pay back the pension obligation bonds. So it turned on them that they lost the money they put into CalPERS, and that's oversimplistic, I know, John.
It is.
But they ended up with both liabilities in the end, and it was
That's not what I thought you were going to say.
Oh. I mean, they ended up paying high rates to CalPERS and having to pay the pension obligation bonds.
Yeah. So think of it this way. So let's set that example aside, and let me give you the example of two agencies. I will name them that issued pension obligation bonds in the 2006-2007 timeframe. Can you guess who those two are? So just so you don't have to guess. Stockton and San Bernardino.
Say Vallejo and
No, not Vallejo. Vallejo did not. Stockton and San Bernardino. And so they did it, but it's timing. What they did was they issued pension obligation bonds at the height of the market, and then all of a sudden they were 30+% lower than where they thought they were going to be. Timing with the pension obligation bond is everything. It's when when do you turn that money in? What does CalPERS earn in the short run? it sounds like I'm trying to talk you out of it. I'm not. Trust me here, I'm not. I just want everybody to understand the risk associated with the pension obligation bond. Now, you could certainly do the so I think if you had us do the analysis, we would likely come back with a probability of success, a likelihood of success that would be lower than you would want it to be. Now, having said that, you could do the same thing, put the money over in the supplemental trust. Even then, though, we have not done an analysis. We've done lots of analysis on the supplemental trust, but they've all been using the supplemental trust as a rate stabilization, not as a significant way to pay the unfunded liability down. So I don't have as good a feel for what that would look like as I would if you issued it and gave the money directly to CalPERS. Because you could presumably borrow at 4.5, invest the money relatively conservative so that you come to a much higher likelihood that you can not have the volatility and the loss of the money.
We would also have to look at the debt capacity, because I don't believe we would get 4.5, and this, John would not know this.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing with him, I'm just
Yeah.
reminding you that we probably have $100 million slotted for infrastructure debt finance. I highly doubt that we can add another 100 million without a significant increase in the rate.
Yeah.
They could match.
And a loss of our rating credit.
Well, it would decrease our rating. And so we would have to do a combination
Yeah.
of analysis between John's probability exercise and then the impacts of the rate and the rating and the rate. And even if we would have that capacity to do, in this scenario of 100 million for infrastructure and 100 million for pension obligation bonds.
We have clients where the interest on a pension obligation, I'm using 4.5 to 5 because in my head I think of you all as having a better credit rating than most.
I think that's a good number for itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we have clients where the interest rate on a pension obligation bond was in excess of 6.
At which
And-
point you wouldn't do it.
At which point it becomes very difficult to do it. Yes.
John, let me step back on the process.
Yeah.
Were you finished your points you wanted?
Like I said, I can keep talking, but yes, I am. I am.
Okay, so I guess we want to see if there are things we want to pass on to the council. Maybe we should just take 2 or 3 minutes each and say
Sure.
what are the things of concern that you would like to talk about, see if we can come up with.
So I guess what I'd like to know is, should we be taking any action as a finance committee to look at this and say to ourselves, how do we maximize the financials of the city? And I've heard everything you said, and I'm not convinced that, we're not marginally better off with, say, a $20 million or a $10 million, a $5 million bond than doing nothing. I'm not convinced of that. And I am sort of convinced that a $300 million bond is the wrong way to go, and my gut sense tells me 200 million is the wrong way to go, and 100 million is probably the wrong way to go for the reasons you outlined in that. So that I'm not convinced that something is not the right way to go. And I'm also not convinced that it's not a good idea to start putting aside money in one of these other fund stabilization ones, and come up with a way. And I'm probably convinced
That's where my head was coming into this, not thinking about the pension obligation bond, was the stabilization kind of thing.
So, I'm thinking that, the way I'm thinking about it is that I'd like to explore and understand what kind of a process. So, let's say we put, $4 million aside a year in a stabilization fund. 5 years, we'd have $20 million. That starts to add up. Now, what that allows you to do is start to pay down and you have a sense that you're going to have it at a particular amount which you can then budget for over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is valuable to the city, right? And then I guess the question is, do you put it in the one that earns you higher, right? But that also entails risk.
Mhm.
And then who manages that? I mean, I guess I'd want to know from Lalo, do you hire a fund manager who then, and is, basically like if I was a private person, I'd hire someone who's a fund manager and we look for that 6%, 5% return. I don't think it makes much sense if we do this, if we're looking for a 1% return. I don't think that makes sense. Politically, we probably suffer some risk if those returns are negative, right?
Let's see, Greg, yeah, I don't want to get into the details, just the topic areas. So those are the two topic areas.
Right, the topic areas for me is what should we do? Should we have any recommendation for council about how we do this?
Okay.
Chair, maybe I can try to help you with, I think what you're trying to do is set some of the policy reviews and options. So there's a couple of ways we could do it, and Suzanne, please chime in. You can give us the high-level options that you desire, and for us to do some homework and come back and present you what the scenarios are and probability of depending on the numbers and the rate stabilization with you here at the Finance Committee. So you would work on it. The challenge we have is the timing. You're ending your term in December, and and the calendar's pretty full. So it may have to carry over or come back with these options to council. So it's just something that we wanted you to have in your discussions as you think about these options.
Thank you.
That's the two
Eric?
leaders of the fund.
I have another question about the normal cost.
Okay, if you could just identify the questions.
My question is basically one of Greg's questions, right, which is, should we set up a separate fund, set aside some money every year, and use that to pay down the unfunded liability if we can get a reasonable rate of return, right, at an acceptable level of risk to the city, right, in order to do that, right? I don't think we should give it to CalPERS for umpteen reasons, but if we can control it, right, and it's the second mechanism here, the trust. I'm interested in that.
So, you mind, is that a question directed to me? Or
Just a second, I want to see
Okay, thank you.
the range of the questions we have. I guess I would like to ask a question about volatility and long-term impacts of volatility. And I would certainly like to ask a question about CalPERS' recent adjustments in rates, which I think has impact. So
I will ask a question about rates, but maybe you'll hit it first, right? So
I have one other question.
okay, what's your?
So the other question is this: you spent a lot of time talking about the risk of doing a pension obligation bond, right? So my question goes: I guess I want to get a sense of what is the risk of not doing it? What's the risk of relying on CalPERS when they have, they could have really bad returns. I'm looking at this, and if you have really bad returns, suddenly you're at 45%. So what I guess I'm wondering is what kind of how much is all it's going to cost if we ask you to do work? Because that may come out of this, right? We may say to them, we want you to look at this, we want you to look at that. So I guess I want to wonder is what is the probability of the 45% contribution rate on the bad returns? Is that a 5% probability? Is that a 10%?
No. So I can answer that very, very quickly.
Okay.
When you look at the graphs on
19.
yeah, thank you. On really 19, 20, 21, and 22, right?
Yep.
If you just kind of think of the upper squares
Yep.
and the lower squares, the difference between those and the 7.5,
Yep.
about 25% of the time we think your rates are going to fall in that range, and about 25% of the time between the 7.5 and the lower squares, and then about 25% of the time the rates will actually be higher than what we're showing, and 25% of the time the rates will be lower, getting down to so those represent about a quartile of the likely projected returns.
A little slow. So 25% of the time, it'll be above the upper square.
Yes.
Top one is the 25th percentile.
Yeah.
Right.
75th percentile.
And so it's 25, 25, and the bottom, and then 25 below.
That's right.
Wow. Okay.
That's the volatility we're talking about.
Okay, I had a question on volatility. If you turn to the slide 8 and 10, you show the accrued liability and the market asset value. Now, my understanding is the rule of investments is that you will get 50 to 60% of your investment gain in the last 5 to 10 years. You know, when you have $1 million accrued and it's growing at 7%, you get more than if you have $100 accrued. So it's when volatility takes place. And it's not just a single year. If you look on 10, the market asset value drops sharply in 8 and 9, but the actual market value did not recover for 5 or 6 years. Now, if you're $100 million, where you're counting the last 5 years of accrual is in that time period, the dollars you lose is tremendous.
Yes.
It takes you years to catch up.
That's right.
So how do you treat volatility in that regard? How can you take an assumption when you have a changing workforce? Sometimes you have large numbers, sometimes not.
So let me give you, so again, I'm going to give you my opinion for how in a perfect world you would address this. The challenge, of course, is that, I don't sit on the CalPERS board. I'm not the CalPERS CEO. I'm not the CalPERS actuary. So my opinion, is only that. And again, I think this is simplistic, but what the example that I always use, if you're providing investment advice to somebody who's 25 years old, beginning to save money for retirement, my comment would be most investment advisors would say, make sure you put money away, number one, and don't be afraid to be aggressive with that investment mix, because you've got a lot of time to make it up. And then as time goes by,
Let me just say, though,
Yeah.
the numbers say our safety people average 41 years old.
Yeah.
And they will retire at 55.
Yeah.
So that's what we're facing.
Yeah, and so what's happened is if the closer you get to retirement, I think you de-risk your portfolio. You don't get to the point where you are 100% in bonds at age 65, but you begin to de-risk it. And what's happening at CalPERS is that de-risking process has not happened to date. That is actually their current, what they are looking for their board to do. What I am suggesting is that you don't have any control over how CalPERS is going to do it, but you have some recognition that the CalPERS chief actuary, the CalPERS CIO, and the CEO are all making recommendations to the CalPERS board that they are too risky.
Let me add one other force of volatility, and that's the city budget. We have our own volatility.
Yeah.
Some years are good years.
Yeah.
We have a surplus. Other years we are struggling.
Yes.
So if we're gonna put money into a fund,
Yeah.
stabilization fund or something, we will not do it the years we don't have money. We'll probably do it the years there's a surplus.
Yes.
Enough funding.
Yeah.
Now, that might not coincide with the volatility needs we might have to pay.
So I love this conversation. Thank you very much. I know that I'm going to make this statement, and it's not going to be immediately apparent. But at CalPERS, contributions have a 2-year delay from events. Let me say that differently. Your June 30, 13 valuation determines your 15, 16 contribution.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know this is not right, but when I look at the cyclical nature of good and bad economies, they are not perfectly cyclical by any stretch of the imagination. But I think of it as being 2 or 3 years of good and 2 or 3 years of bad. I know it's not, but that's just what I have in my fat head. And if you think about the 2-year delay at CalPERS, what's happening is that will be counter-cyclical from your separate trust fund and city investment. And so in my mind, kind of a hidden advantage to the supplemental trust is that it actually, I think, will prove to be counter-cyclical. And so it's not perfect. It will not work out exactly as I've just described, but I just kind of have in my head that that's where things are going to be.
Okay, let me add one other point. If you turn to 2, historical investment returns.
Yeah.
We coming out of the 2 decades in which there were first 6 years of gains in a row.
Yeah.
Next time there were 4 years of gains in a row.
Yeah.
Now we have 2 years in a row.
Yes.
And another 2 years.
Yes.
So we seem to be in a period of time where you can't count on a regular cycle.
No question. You can't count on a regular cycle. I wouldn't suggest that you can. What I am suggesting is that there is no question there is some cycle that can be factored in, and what I am suggesting is when you have those good years, if you don't take a portion of the good and set it aside for the bad, I just think these trusts give you an advantage for that sort of
So
thing.
bottom line, you think the volatility issue actually would argue for some kind of stabilization?
Yes, that's right. That's exactly.
Okay.
That's
Good.
right.
That's my question.
So, this is a dumb layman question, right? I got all my assets in Vanguard total index funds, right? Okay. I don't expect 7.5%. So why does CalPERS expect 7.5%? Because they got to be more conservative than I am.
No.
No, they're more
I think
aggressive.
that's part of the problem. So
I'm 100% in equities, right?
That's what they're trying to deal with in this.
Yeah, they are
Are they
not
wildcat
just,
oil drilling or something?
well, I'm not an investment guy. I'm not an
They're in trouble
investment
in
guy.
real estate. Not too
They
long
got
ago.
in serious trouble because of leveraged real estate,
Yes.
which is not in your Vanguard account.
That's true.
But the the 7.5. What I want you to do is take a step back from the 7.5 because people focus on the 7.5. Inherent in the 7.5 is a 2 3/4 inflation assumption. I'd be willing to bet you are not thinking about a inflation of 2 3/4 in your Vanguard expectation.
That's true.
So if you take the 7.5, pull out the 2 3/4, you get to 4 3/4 real rate of return above inflation.
Yep.
And so I don't know where you think inflation is going to be, but I bet it's below 2 3/4. Maybe it's at 2, 1.5.
Okay.
And so that gets you to, I bet, an expectation for your Vanguard account. You might have a little bit higher real rate of return than CalPERS has. But that's the issue. People all the time think about 7.5. It's not 7.5. It's the real rate of return above inflation. And by the way, that inflation drives the investment return and the liability calculation.
Sure.
So let me follow up with the rate. What they're trying to do now,
Yeah.
as you say, next week, is to change their risk profile.
Yes.
And what they have said is when they have a good year, above 7.5,
Yes.
they will use that to reduce their long-term rate of return.
Yes.
So every time they have a good year, our costs will go up.
Not quite. So let me say this differently. This is again simplistic. What they're going to do is not use all of it. They're going to use about half of it. So if the investment return is 11.5 rather than 7, they're going to let your rates drop by taking 2%, half of the gain, as a reduction in the rate, and the other 2 is going to be to reduce the risk.
Okay, now that reduces their risk in
Yeah.
a long time, makes it more secure. On the counterforce, where they have a lousy year,
Yeah,
or 2 lousy years,
Yeah.
or 3 lousy years, they don't change.
they
our
don't
rate.
change.
On
Well,
the
they're going to
contrary-
increase you're going to pay for the
Yes.
investment losses.
So either way,
Yeah.
they say the rates will go up,
Yes.
either to pay for investment loss or because they're taking less risk.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't seem to be a good investment for us.
Well, let me say it like this.
I do recall, I read
Yeah.
somewhere that their cost of investment is on the order of, what, $200 million a year. So they are making substantial
Yeah.
money.
Let me.
Shouldn't we be getting something of more value
Yeah.
from them?
Let me say this. Let me say this differently. This is not a fair comparison, but you all probably have. I'm just going to say this in a general term. You do. I do. My retirement is not in a defined benefit plan. It's in a 401k personal savings, right?
Yeah.
And the older I've gotten, the more risk I run if I have that money heavily invested. If I don't have any other alternative, any other means for retirement, I'm putting my retirement savings and my ability to retire at significant risk. And so my mantra is, the closer I get to using that money, the more conservative I want
Sure.
to be with it.
Right.
When you look,
They are not getting older. As a
No, they
matter of
are-
fact, the number of people entering the system is rising. So they're like a baby boom. They're youngsters.
yeah,
They're not getting to be 70.
So take a step back and don't think of they. Think of you. You meaning the city of Palo Alto. You are getting older. And in fact, let me tell you how I know this. Go to, let's just look at safety. and there's, you can look at slide 6, or you can look at slide 12. Both of those say that you are a more mature city than you were 15 years ago.
Now, that's not true, I don't think. Every time we talk to them, we say, hire younger people. And they have said, oh, we're doing that, and our age is going down. What these charts show, though, is the number of retirees. And that's the fact they're living.
Go to slide 5.
Yeah.
These are 3 snapshots of the age of your active employees and the city service.
Okay.
So what I want you to do is, this happens to be safety. We could look at miscellaneous, but it, the difference is really.
No, but safety is saying they're
Let's-
trying to lower that age.
Yeah, so what's going on here at safety is the average age of safety in 94 was 39 with 13 years of prior service. So that means you were hiring people on average at age 26. Now, do me a favor and go to 13. The average age is 41 with average city service of 11. So the average age at which you're hiring safety officers is now 30. So what's going on is it's easy for, now safety is a different animal than non-safety, but it is, your competition for firefighters is crazy. And so you're not hiring 20-year-old firefighters because the 25-year-old are better at filling, they come out better in the competition than the 20-year-old. They come, they walk in here with 5 years of experience as paramedics or something, and so you're hiring people at later ages. The same, by the way, is true for non-safety as well. It's just maybe not as dramatic. So your average age is older. Of the actives, it's older, but you also, your average total population is older. Why? Because you have more retirees compared to actives. And a portion of your liability that is for those retirees is absolutely growing. There is no doubt that you all are more mature than you have been in any time. And we are not expecting that trend to change anytime soon.
Now,
So-
is that why our unfunded liability has been growing so much faster than our normal costs? Is that why we have that?
Here's what's happening. Not quite. What happens is the more mature you become, the more money, the more volatile your unfunded liability is. So in other words, the more painful a big drop is, because you are closer to that age 65 full retirement. I need my retirement money. You are closer. You're not there, but you are closer. So that investment drop in 8 and 9 was more painful than it would have been had that happened in 93 or 94. It was more painful than the dot-com bubble, and the dot-com bubble was less than a decade before the drop in 8 and 9.
It's interesting. I think that it actually, it's not a linear thing, right? The most expensive employee for the city to hire is not the one that starts at 25, it's more like 35 or 40, because they're going to work fewer years to retirement, still get a big pension, and live the same number after retirement. And as I was mucking around with this kind of stuff, it didn't seem like the most expensive person was actually the one that started at age 20 and worked 40 years. It was because of the ratio of how many years worked
The
to how many
coin,
years
the
collected.
coin for the 35-year-old is a little bit bigger than it is for the 25-year-old.
Right, and if you net it all out, it actually costs the city more, right, because of the years spent working versus the years spent not working. Right?
If the 35-year-old might argue
Right.
that they are walking in here with some experience, and so they're worth more. I'm just saying.
I understand, right? I'm
So
just looking at-
I'm
it might
not
be
gonna-
true, right? I'm just
yeah.
looking at numbers. Right?
Yeah,
But they have fewer years of the 7.5% gains.
it's absolutely right. That's
Right.
the big issue.
Right.
That's the big issue. That's right.
But I assume, okay, I assume, as I think the overwhelming majority of Californians that understand any of this stuff, which is not that many, right, that don't work in that sector, right, is that the real issue here, right, is that CalPERS said, you know, our portfolio, CalPERS portfolio, the way they invest it, really is going to grow on average like that. I mean, yeah, it's going to be volatile, okay, but it's going to look, I mean, it's this chart, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Right? But CalPERS has said for years, no. We're going to grow that fast, okay? And all the cities in the state and so forth made deals to spend money at this level, okay? And this amount of money is not covered by what CalPERS is earning. So sooner or later, we're going to have to pay for all this, okay? And part of the reason that our margins are going up is because this load is getting bigger. And as CalPERS gets more realistic about what it's really going to make, right, our contributions go up.
So I don't know whether you're asking for a response to that or not.
Maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm trying to answer his question. Why is the contributions going up, right?
Yeah, because it might take a while to. There's a lot of assumptions in there, and so it would be a difficult question to answer in whatever time we have left of our 4 hours.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think the critical issue that we face as a city is we get our long-term financial forecast, and it clearly states that our benefits, pension benefits and health, are going up much faster than our income. And that puts pressure on wages. So for young people coming in, the 25 or 30-year-olds, who is more interested in paying for a house, a family, we're saying, oh, you gotta wait 30 years to get your pension before you get the real benefits of the job. So, you know, how do we make that balance, that trade-off? How can we, attract young workers who right now are not, their main issue is not the retirement years, but how can I have family years?
That one we're not going to fix.
So, should we turn to Lalo's issue, which is, want to ask staff to put together some proposals for us that we can then ultimately send to council?
What we could do with the proposal, give you some suggested options on how to fund it. Some of it would be one-time, things that would, you've heard before, or you heard from John, and try to come up with other ways that come forward, such as additional employee contributions that could be set aside to the trust.
When you say the trust, and you mean the trust we would create?
Good question. So at this point, we as staff are leaning towards a 115 managed by a third party, not internal. When we looked at it before.
So when you say a 115, is that that's the
right,
other
right,
trust?
right.
That's
It's a
TMA,
we'll
PR.
call it a supplemental, it's the PFM PARS
Okay.
trust.
Because you're right, if we manage it internally in a the internal service fund, right now we're getting 1.9%.
So
That's
it's-
not, that doesn't make sense. So we
No
can-
interest in that.
And we looked at it as us trying to hire creating the trust, getting the letter from the IRS, getting the investment managers, and it just gets too
Too hard.
complicated. So that's why,
Third party. We get
third
it.
party. And so what we would do is come back and give you some scenarios. I think John's got an excellent example of one that he's worked on, where if he, we worked together with him to come up with some number, it could be a step-up number, because you have other obligations, we have other obligations as an organization. We know that we have to continue focusing on our infrastructure as well, and those costs need to be updated. So it's a big picture, to your point, Vice Mayor, that, the long-range financial forecast, what else is in there? And so we provide you some methodology of how to do that, and then some options on how to fund it on an ongoing basis, and some potential, and maybe I'm getting a little too far here, but potential targets that we could choose from. They would help us with the probability numbers as to where it would lead us. The benefit of having that from our perspective is that if we do, right now we're hearing 2 to 3 years, 2018 could be a recession year, and we're hearing from a couple of sources. And we have this trust set up, it will give us the flexibility to avoid harsh decisions such as immediate freeze of all positions, which we did during the significant downturn. That impacts all of us, not just staff, but the services, because maybe we're freezing positions that are essential, but we can't do it any other way to close that gap. So by having this trust, it gives us that flexibility of at least buying us time, if nothing else, to make informed decisions within a year or so. So I think that's why it's important that we think about it from a rate stabilization, and then also from, as you've all been discussing with John, a mechanism to potentially pay down the unfunded portion as well, so the hybrid.
Now, Lalo, you say define the contributions. Would that be an annual basis, or is it a one-time type of thing with the budget?
Well, Lalo and I've been talking about this with staff and David and Nancy and John, and it could be any combination. It could be one time if you have budget surplus at the end of the year, you could put part of it away in the pension trust account. And, in addition to setting aside money for infrastructure, this could be one line. As John outlined, when you set a target, if it's 48% on safety, when we do better than 48%, we could set that delta away in that trust account. Other benefit savings we've talked about that, from time to time we budget a certain level for other benefits and they come in under due to vacancies or other areas. So there could be any number of options. And then you can also set aside, as finances provide, a regular contribution, which, if we really want to use this for that rate stabilization and target a 48% perhaps for safety and a 33% for miscellaneous, John could help us set a target on what the dollar target needs to be to keep that stabilization over the next 10 years. So those are some of the options we've been talking
Very
about.
general, what's the size of the contribution that you would think of?
Well, I think we need to give you some examples, but just to kind of touch base to what the deep recession was, we had over a period of a couple of years a $16 million, and I'm speaking general fund only, a $16 million structural deficit. So, you could say a simple, just off the cuff here, 50% of that could be a target.
16 million deficit in our pension.
No, I'm sorry, that was in our general fund.
Yeah, what would that translate in? How do we think of the amount we would need to put aside to be helpful in a period like that? 1 million, 10 million?
Well, and John, maybe you could help us. We were playing with some numbers, but to stay at some of our targets, to really over that 10-year period to have a stable budget contribution, I think we were talking about maybe $1 million a year for each of the miscellaneous and the safety, with the target of getting to about $12 million in the fund, weren't we?
I think that's right. I think if you have a sort of target over time to get to 10 to 12 million
over a time period.
over a time period, I think that's right.
Yeah, that's a helpful number
So you're thinking
scale.
12 million over 12 years, is that what you're thinking?
I'm not sure I exactly remember, just in the interest of disclosure here, but in my head, I was thinking a 12 million over a shorter period of time. The idea really is to get the money into the fund sooner so that it begins to earn that rate of return. That's what gives you the flexibility. So I would think of it over a shorter period of time. But, you know, everything is relative. We can easily give you alternatives.
And that could be the set goal for each year, but keep in mind that there might be other one-time fundings that seed that fund that could get us there towards John's point. So what we plan to do is give you some alternative scenario on the 15th of December with the long range. It runs some scenario, some number. We may not have all the methodologies behind it, but at least you have the concept and the impacts of the run.
Okay.
The one thing that I also think we should remember that John's pointed out is even when we put $1 million in the 115 trust fund, it reduces our unfunded liability by $1 million. That sitting in the 115 trust is also offsetting our unfunded liability. So that's a positive. In addition to the rate stabilization potential of keeping us on an even keel on budgeting, anything we're putting in that trust account reduces
The problem is, the year you have the general budget squeeze, and you might need the money flowing from the trust fund, is the year the trust fund, if it's invested by anyone in something that earns money, might be minus 10%. So do you want to be spending your money when it's at its smallest value?
Yeah, and
Absorbing the loss.
You may recall this. We talked about this earlier. When we were super funded, what we did, and I can't take the credit with my predecessor. I was the budget manager, and he gave me the direction. He said, "Continue to charge us like the rate is the same from 2 years ago, and put that money aside, and we're putting it away for retire medical." And that's how we started the retire medical. We ended up accumulating $25 million over that period of time.
What was the period?
It was the 1999 to 2001 in that period, in that where it was. And so, but then we turned around, and you may recall this because you were a little uncomfortable. We sent the money to CalPERS and the OPEB trust, and what did it do? It immediately tanked. But over time, it came back.
Yeah.
Right, and so we may have that situation where we already have a pressure budget and a pressure situation, and the rate of return it could
But
have.
that's what a fund is for.
Right.
Okay, other comments or
So
suggestions
I
for
would like,
Lalo?
I would like to know if there's any validity, and there may not be, to do some sort of pension liability bond. I just would like the information.
I think we should look at that too.
It might take us a little longer, because from the
John works
12:15
quickly.
Well, remember, it's a two-prong review. John, and then the financial advisor, because we want to have a discussion. We kind of had this discussion already, because at one point we were
Who's the
talking.
financial advisor?
PFM. And so it's a separate branch of the investment side of the trust. They advised us during the GEO bonds that we issued.
Well, what advice are you seeking from them?
What would the market reaction would be if we were to say issued let's just say $100 million for infrastructure, and then we add another 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. We'll go with the
No, fair
impact to
enough.
our
That's a good
rating.
question.
B.
I agree.
But you'd still be able to reach the December 1st date of coming back with something.
December 15th with some
15th,
some numbers on alternative scenarios.
Yeah, just to help think
Because we
through.
also want to reintroduce a recessionary scenario. You may not agree with us on the year, and we're picking a year. We're not,
Yeah.
you know. But I think we want to show you that too, because we need to have this big
That's
picture
right.
discussion of everything that we need to
Yeah.
address.
Okay, any other suggestions that might help Lalo and his team?
I still want to ask my question about normal cost.
Yeah.
Let's do it the right place.
Why don't you go ahead?
The normal cost. My son works here for a year and he gets a coin, okay? Or the city sets aside a coin. He also paid 8% of his wage into a fund, right, for his retirement. The normal cost, does that include the 8% that he paid? Is it net of that, or is it?
That's a great question. So I use the term normal cost kind of loosely, but really the terms should be used as total normal cost,
Yes.
a portion of which is the member contribution rate. So the member contribution rate is a component of the total normal cost. When we looked at the graphs here and we saw the 10, 11%
Yeah.
normal cost rate,
Mhm.
that really was the city portion of the total rate.
Right.
It was not the total and would not include what the members are paying.
So the cost to the city is then, are you,
If-
they can't be.
John, you have
I-
a
I
graph
mu-
here that
I
shows
must have
the,
understood
I
this
mean, a
wrong.
table
So are you saying the cost to
on
the
page
city
32.
is actually lower than this because part
No.
of this is paid by the
No,
employee?
that is the city normal
That is
cost.
the city's cost.
That's
net
correct.
of what the employee is.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
so,
Page 32, or slide 32,
yeah.
is a summary of our normal cost
Yep.
with the employees portion.
That happens to be safety, non-safety on slide 31.
Oh, I'm sorry, I have safety, but yeah, and 31 is,
So if your son is hired here as a Pepper employee,
Mhm.
he is paying 6 1/4,
Yep.
and the city's cost would be 6 1/4, total cost of 12 1/2. Total normal cost 12 1/2. City portion 6 1/4, employee portion 6 1/4.
and that's the third column on page 31.
That's right.
Got
And
it.
that's
So
what we-
he pays 6 1/4
Yes,
and the city pays 6 1/4.
yes.
But sooner or later, the city is going to have to pay him back once he retires. Okay?
No, well,
Well,
tell me what.
I'm saying this wrong. Let's say he makes $100,000.
Yes.
Right? He gets paid really
Okay.
well. He makes $100,000. So he pays $6,500, and the city pays $6,500.
That's right.
Now, when he retires, he's going to collect a pension.
That's right.
How do we know that that portion of the pension is $13,000 net present value, or is it?
There are two ways you know. Okay.
Okay.
Way number one is trust me.
Okay.
It's way number one. Way number two is you either do the let me just tell you this 6 1/4
Right.
is not our calculation, it's CalPERS calculation. We believe
Yes.
it is a very reasonable representation of what we think their calculation is right.
Yeah.
And so when I say trust me, it's not that we've done the calculation and we're telling you 6 1/4. The CalPERS actuaries have done the calculation and we have reviewed it and we think that calculation is Right.
I think that, I'm sorry, I don't have
Yeah.
copies, but that's what they're saying. They're gonna earn 68 cents for that dollar that needs to be paid. The
That's right.
city's gonna pay 16 and the employee 16 cents.
This is a PEPRA dollar, right?
Yes.
The PEPRA.
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially what the PEPRA claim is, right, is that each new employee under PEPRA will not incur an unfunded liability, if I understand what this says right.
Well, let's be clear. Actuaries are smart enough to know
Right.
that you never get exactly what is projected.
Yeah.
What CalPERS is saying and what you would hear me say
Mhm.
is that the odds are there is a 50% chance
Right.
that there will either for a PEPRA employee with that 6.25 into the future, that there will either be an unfunded liability or a surplus. One thing I can promise you, it's like, I'm not a betting guy,
Right.
but I will put 50 cents on the table so fast it isn't even funny, that the unfunded liability will not be zero. Why?
Okay.
Because we know that that things will never work out exactly like the actuaries think.
Right.
What you're hearing me say is,
Oh, I see. You're saying there's an even chance it'll be positive or negative.
yes,
Okay.
that's right.
I can live with that.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that is exactly what
expected
that
value
is.
is zero.
The expected is zero,
Right.
but the real number, I promise you, will not be zero.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
That
So-
doesn't quite add up because half the people who join the city never get pensioned. So there's a big fund of money out there that either contributes to that.
When you say half never get pensions,
Well,
Is-
you-
tell me-
the actuarial assumption assumes on average so many people work so long and
no,
they get such
no,
and such a
but
raise.
wait,
and-
go slow here for me. Terminology is so important it isn't even funny.
Mhm.
There is no doubt in my mind there is a high degree of probability that everybody you hire will not retire directly from the city.
Mhm.
That's quite different than not getting a pension benefit. So
From
on
CalPERS.
OPEB, if they don't retire directly from the city, they don't get an OPEB benefit. But on the pension side, I don't think,
What's OPEB stand for?
The retirement.
retiree medical, I'm so sorry, yeah.
Other
The,
Right.
on the pension side, I bet, I don't know off the top of my head what it is, but I would bet that your probability that people don't get a pension is substantially lower than 50%.
Oh, do you have off the top of your head of the people working in the city now? You know, what's the turnover of people between 0 and 10?
Go ahead, sorry.
It's probably about 6% annual turnover, if that's your question. But I think the point is
They
this,
go work
is
for
you
another
don't
agency.
know who they go to work for. They can work for another PERS agency,
Yeah.
they can work for another reciprocal agency in California,
Yeah, okay.
and we don't know that.
What I can tell you we do know
I guess
is the percentage of people who actually take a lump sum is not very high.
right.
And those are the only people who don't get a pension.
But I'm just asking the question as a, economist. There's another column, another row in there of money that has been put in the name of someone who does not draw.
But isn't
And-
that net in their calculation, John? I mean, they are already figuring into our fund. We get an average rate, and it takes all of that into account. They know who has cashed out their.
So in the interest of, again, full disclosure, I have never been able to duplicate their calculation. Okay? I think it's within the range of reasonableness, but I can't duplicate it, so I don't exactly know what's in their calculation. Having said that, all they're saying there is that for every retirement dollar they pay, the vast majority is interest and about a third of it is contributions. That's really what they're saying there.
Okay.
I think
So-
that's all they're saying there.
So
But the point is, of that third that's contribution,
Right.
it's designed to be 50% employee, 50% city.
So this is the case for Pepra, but not other employees.
Yes, that's correct.
So if we hire a new public safety person, right, for example, the arithmetic is going to
Who
be different.
who is a classic employee,
For example.
yes.
See, the thing
The
that
dollar would be different, that's correct.
the thing that I want to understand, right, and we're sort of getting off topic here, but every year we go through our budget and we get this great report about all our expenses, and I'll just pick one department. I pick libraries because it's miscellaneous, and we get a view of how fast our costs are increasing. And under this budget, you know, we're gonna spend 13.7% more money next year, right, in expenses. But the accrued liability of pensions, right, doesn't show up anywhere in here. And there's no way for us to look at this and say, well, if we do that, it's gonna cost the city X much more than, I mean, that grew. I mean, I don't know whether that grew 1% or 10% or 20%. We don't see it anywhere. And that's why I'm sort of wondering, is there a way to reflect that in here as well? Because we should be able to track it by individual, right? You know, you got those coins, right? Right?
Well,
We should be able to see those coins somewhere in our system.
When you get your June 30, 15 financial statement,
Mm-hmm.
you will have, as a component of that financial statement,
Right.
won't go down to the fund balance level, but on a citywide basis,
Mhm.
it will show your total unfunded liability
Right.
as a net pension liability. And so you will see that unfunded liability as I know this is a wrong terminology, but it's absolutely the way that I think of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you all were a private sector entity, that net pension liability
Right.
would be a reduction to shareholder equity
Yep.
or a reduction to fund balance.
No question about
So
it.
you will see that when you get your,
But my challenge as a city council person is that I'm being asked to approve a budget for each department here without understanding what the impact of what I'm approving is going to have on the city's liabilities in the future relative to pensions and OPEB, right? Okay? And it's hard for me to do that because it's a significant number.
well, part of your contribution in the budget
Okay?
is for the coin
Mhm.
and for the payment on the prior unfunded coins.
Well, I don't know how big the coin is. My sense is the coins could be significant. If I knew what the coins were, right, I might make different decisions on can I approve on how can I approve this library budget without knowing what the coins are.
Well,
We do know the personnel.
We,
And that's a key
Personnel.
issue.
you do, and you
And we
do
know
know
what
the
percent.
percentage, you know the percentage
Yeah.
for the coins relative to percentage of payroll.
Yeah.
So that information is here.
we know if it's a Pepper employee, that it's 6.2% of that salary
Yeah.
that we're gonna pay. We know, if you're looking at the normal cost, we know our PERS rates and what we're gonna pay, and that's broken out. And, I mean, but it's not per department, the benefits are there, but if
Well, I
you.
know. I mean, that's the thing. It goes into this giant pool, right? And I see this chart, which says that, you know, if CalPERS earns 7.5%, then it's going to look like that for the city. And if it's going to look like that percent, if it's 6.5%, then it's going to look like that, and so forth, right? But how do I say, you know, if we outsource this piece of this department, right, or this function, how does that affect this overall picture? That's very hard.
So that's a no, that there there is a knowable answer to that
Okay.
question. What happens is the coin goes away,
Yeah.
but you still have to pay off the unfunded liability.
Yeah. But
Normal cost coin.
Yeah, normal cost
normal
goes
cost
away.
goes away. The normal cost goes away.
Okay,
Okay? So if the normal cost accurately reflects what the city's gonna have to pay in the future, then if you had the normal cost in here, or you looked it up somewhere, you would be able to answer that question.
except the gap between the normal cost and the
And the
unfunded
contribution,
liability is-
that's not
the
going
problem.
away. Right.
Right.
So we're gonna come back and, do we need to vote on what we talked about earlier?
I think we're making recommendations to Lalo.
Then Lala's gonna come back, we're not gonna.
Will come back to
That's
us.
fine, so if Lala's just gonna accept those recommendations, is there any other recommendations to Lala?
I'd like to make one other thing. We talked a little bit about the new rate system for CalPERS, in which city pays more whether the rates go up or down. And I'd like to have some estimate of what impact that is likely to have on.
They provided us some documentation that we can prepare for you. And I think there's room in the 17th agenda. Let me see if I can incorporate it into the year-end financials to share that, because by then, hopefully, I believe the board would have met. We're meeting November 17th, and I think the board meets before that.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the date. It's
Probably
right
the
around that
same
date.
day.
It's maybe
Like
the same
last
day?
month, we were
Is it
meeting
a
on the
meeting on a
same day they
Tuesday?
were reviewing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, the committee meeting, I bet,
It's
is
the
the
same.
17th.
Well, we could at least show you what their proposal
Yeah,
is.
on the basis of the
Yeah,
proposal.
because it has a number, and then we just take that based on our percentage of pay, and so we can show you.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that, as John mentioned earlier, it has a 2-year lag from an impact.
Yeah, but it seems no matter what happens, the volatility will increase our costs.
Yes, they're trying to offset it, as John mentioned earlier, to not make it as significant, but there is the impact.
Yeah.
Are we
Okay,
done?
I guess the one other question I would have, one other comment I would have, is that fairness is an issue. So are we collecting money in one year to pay for someone in the future or someone in the past? And how do we allocate it fairly so people, our taxpayers, are paying for the services they get? Or we could sell it on that basis. So some notion of that in there would be helpful.
So noted. I think, we need to have a discussion on that.
Yeah. Okay, any further comments, questions?
I could keep this guy busy all night, but you guys should. I don't want to keep you guys here.
Okay, so what we're doing is we have given our comments to Lalo, and he will take them with his team and come back to us on the 17th with some comments on the 1st.
On the
15th.
on the rate structure that's being recommended to the board, and then on scenarios in the long-range financial forecast, and if possible, some methodologies and funding options, potential funding options.
Great. John, I want to thank you for coming and
Our pleasure.
presenting and sharing.
You can stay and talk to Eric for that.
Let's see, Lalo, do we need to talk at all about the future agenda?
It's in the back of your calendar. It hasn't
Yes.
changed much, so I think we'll update it on the 17th to see if there's any
But
changes.
you're gonna add in, I think we made a bit of a commitment to add in,
Oh,
composting. I think you need to add that in.
composting?
Yes.
Ooh, I'm sorry. I had not been debriefed, so.
So
Okay.
last night, we did not pass the composting ordinance. Phil Bobo wants it before the end of the year to come to finance.
Oh, that's what that was. He
That's
left
what
me a
that
message.
was.
He wanted to talk
So
about
we need
an
to
item.
add it in somewhere.
So I told him that 12/15 was probably the most likely day, and he said he could not do it any sooner anyway.
Okay.
So that's probably the day that, I didn't realize that was the item. Okay.
I'm good with that. I just wanted to make sure we were focused on it.
Okay.
Okay, everything else on the agenda is set, so the meeting is adjourned. Thank
Great.
everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Now that we've adjourned the meeting, I had one question while all three of us were here. You're starting the budget process again.
Internally? Yes.
Yes, right? When the budget process comes, so if we as a finance committee wanted to give you direction to come back with a budget that doesn't increase more than X, or doesn't increase more than Y, or something along those lines, now would probably be the right time to do that, while you're putting the budget together. As opposed to having you, if we gave some direction about where we wanted to see increases or
We
stuff like
should
that.
not have a discussion of all three members of the committee. If you're making a formal request rather
No, I'm
than
not
just
making formal
asking-
requests, I'm just asking questions.
Hypothetical.
These are hypothetical questions.
My suggestion, and see what Suzanne wants us to say, is that you talk to Jim, that I don't feel comfortable in giving you an answer. I think Jim should give you an answer.
Okay.